Hey folks, thanks for joining. Basically, the cost of a new shed would probably run around $4,500 or something like that installed. What I wanted to do was to figure out if there is a way that I could reorganize my existing shed, reclaim unused space, and organize things a little bit better to do that. So this video talks to you about that. So if you look at the pictures, you see the before picture and then the after picture. You would see how much of improvement has been made and how vertical space has been utilized. 80% of the video is going to be focused on how I built a loft to use the vertical space, and in the end I'll walk you around the shed and give a walkthrough of the other key builds that I've done inside to organize things better, right? So stay tuned, and if you like this video, I would really appreciate if you can subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.
So this is how my shed looked. It was full of clutter, as you're seeing, a lot of items just scattered all over, not fully organized. So first thing I did is I cleaned out my shed and moved everything to one side. And so I'm creating some space where I can actually work. And in that area, I'm going to build a loft. So the first thing you're seeing is, since I'm going to work alone, I've got to do a few things to support myself. So as you're seeing here, what I'm doing is I'm putting a piece of 2x4 on the back wall, and I'm holding it in place by a block at the bottom, and then I'm anchoring it to the wall. So I'm just going to go and put screws into each of the studs across the whole span. It's about a 3-inch screw. It's about a 1.5 inch for this 2x4, and then it penetrates into the back stud. So about a 3-inch screw is what I'm using. I'm using one screw per stud, and I'm kind of varying the pattern like an S pattern, right? If one goes up, one goes down. So I keep going across the wall to do it. Once I'm done with this, what I'm going to be next doing is to check the level and see if everything is horizontally level, right? So I'm putting the level at multiple places after I finish this, and then I'll see if all of them are aligning clearly. If not, I'll have to move it up or down, right? So once that's done, now I'm going to be taking out the blocking, and that would end the first part of this. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be running a couple of pieces of 2x4 parallel to the one that I put in the back. So I'm placing my blocking on the right hand side and the left hand side against two studs, holding it in place with clamp, and then putting a 2x4 and seeing if it's level to the back, and then I'll be anchoring this into the wall. For this, I'm basically using, I think, 2.5 inch screws. 1.5 inch for the 2x4 and 1.5 inch for the stud would make it 3. So I'm like putting a 2.5 inch screw. So once I do this, I'm going to be repeating the same process for 3 more. So in total, I would like to get 4 horizontal supports running wall to wall, and all of them need to be parallel to each other. So as I do each of them, I'm going to be measuring if it's parallel using my level. So now you're seeing me using the level horizontally on one of the spans. You may ask if you've already measured and each of them are parallel to each other. The back span is parallel to the front span. Is there a reason to even check the level on the front span, right? Because if two lines are parallel to each other and are measured to be on level, do you really independently have to measure each one on level? It's a geometry question, so I don't think it's needed. But it's just an overkill, right? From my perspective, I just want to make sure everything is perfect. So I just did that. So when I put the level across all of them and measure, now I'm seeing that everything is kind of aligned with each other. So the next step is where I'm kind of holding the 2x4s that span horizontally from the bottom, right? So what I've done initially in the first step is I put in 2x4s running wall to wall, but all of these are held in place by screws on the right hand side and the left hand side anchored into the studs, right? But I also need a way to support them from the bottom so that the only support is not landing on the screw, right? I need some reinforcement from the bottom so that it is able to support the weight and the load gets distributed through the horizontal span and through another piece of vertical stud that I attach, supporting it, and goes down to the base, right? I want to distribute the forces. So I've cut 2x4s to an exact height that can fit between the bottom plate and the horizontal 2x4 mounted on the top. So it's kind of reinforcing. It's called a jack stud as well. That's what I think they use the terminology. So I've cut about 6 of them, and you're seeing me tapping it with a mallet. So it's very difficult to kind of measure the height here because it's got the bottom plate and the top plate. So what I did was I just did a lot of trial and error where I cut the wood to a certain height, tried to fit it in, and saw where exactly it was blocking, and then went back and cut a little bit more. It's better to always be cautious and make it a bit longer than what is needed, so that you can take off material. With the prices of the 2x4 kind of increasing due to COVID, I think it's extremely important that you don't waste material, right? And then putting a couple of screws to ensure that these are positioned correctly and are able to support the horizontal spans running from left to right. So once I screw them all together, what I noticed was that some of these 2x4s were bent a little bit, so there was a small gap between these two pieces that I'm trying to anchor together. Since I'm working alone, what I did was I unscrewed it and then put a clamp and used the clamp to pull both the 2x4s together so that there's no gap between them. And then I'm going to be installing the screw again, right? So this is one way for you to kind of get some support when you're working alone, where you can rely on the tools that you have to be able to do the job perfectly. So I would repeat it across the board on all of them, looking at and seeing. Not all of them have a gap, so the one in the front that you saw right now and the one in the back on that wall, both of them have a small gap. So in both the cases, I'm taking it out. In the back, if you see, I don't know if you can see it clearly here, but there are actually 3 studs there. One is supporting, one is a window frame. The second one is the existing structure supporting the shed. And the third one is the jack stud that I added, right? So that my clamp had to be expanded quite a bit to hold all the 3 of them together. They're all done now, so I'm just giving some final touches and seeing if everything is stable. As you're seeing there, I'm pulling it down and seeing if it's fairly stable. It seems extremely stable right now with the support that has been added as jack studs as well. Next, what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that it's level and nothing has shifted at the time that I was actually putting in the jack stud and hammering it in and screwing it into the 2x4 in the front. So everything appears to be fine. Now what you're seeing here is the blocking that I've added between the horizontal spans, right? The horizontal spans were rocking back and forth. From left to right, it's kind of fixed, but it was moving from front to back. So in order to stop that, I've added this blocking just to make sure that it's not moving around. We'll be mounting the plywood to the supports that I've created. Since the 8 feet 4 by 8 piece of plywood was fairly large to bring in my car, I actually asked them to cut it into 2. So I have 2 sections here, which I came back home and then I fitted exactly to the size that I needed for it to fit here. It's a 1/2 inch plywood that I'm using. I was kind of surprised to see the cost of this plywood has also skyrocketed. Something for which I used to spend like about $20-25 in the past. It's about 45, right? So I've got to really be careful in not wasting the material. So I got it home, cut it to size, and I'm putting it there. The key thing here is to just make sure that there are no gaps here. And you're seeing at the back there's a small gap, which I'm kind of tapping into place, and the gap has disappeared, right? Everything is fitting snugly. Now what I need to do is I need to screw them into the pieces at the bottom, which is what you're seeing that I'm doing. This was one of the most difficult things because I did not have a line of sight into the studs at the bottom, and I had to get the screws exactly into the studs at the bottom, right? So it was a lot of trial and error, making some holes and seeing if there was a stud underneath it and then doing it. Now comes the pressure test. I'm putting the ladder up and seeing if it can sit and it can take on my weight. It appears to be extremely stable, fairly strong. It's holding me, so I think it'll hold whatever goods I'm going to put on top of it.
So now to show you the final results of how the transformation for the storage is taking place, I'm just walking to my shed. I'll just open it momentarily and walk you around. So this is how it looks now. As you're seeing, very cleanly organized. All of the items are going inside. Everything is neatly arranged to be able to pick up anything quite easily. You're seeing the loft in action here. As you're seeing, it's already been loaded with all the stuff at the top. And you're seeing it's kind of holding up very well with absolutely no sagging anywhere. So I'll just focus on a few things for the loft. In the video I'd shown you about the jack studs, right? So this is how they're actually supporting the horizontal span above. You're seeing this stud on the right hand side was a regular stud on the wall, to which I added this jack stud, on top of which this horizontal span is actually going across on both the sides, right? So that's what it's doing here. In this bay as well, the same thing. And you're seeing the space being used very effectively under the loft for some storage here, right? And the other thing I also wanted to show you was there are other things that I needed to build a shelf for, so I just used some scrap pieces of wood to build this shelf. So everything that you're seeing here is repurposed based on whatever material I had lying around, right? So this basic structure is this, right? The basic structure are, you got these MDF pieces that I have in the front. You see that I put some plywood pieces or whatever leftover wood was there from the back to the front, and then that's being supported underneath by this horizontal span running from one end to another, and this is in turn being supported and anchored over here, right? And you're seeing that the shelf here is being held up by this piece of 2x4 all over, right? So it's a very simple design. I saw some YouTube videos on some very simple builds. Just wanted to keep it simple and cheap, so just use some leftover wood to be able to do this. And at the bottom you're seeing I'm being used it for storing some of the leftover wood, and on this end I'm using this to store some pieces of leftover wood as well. And on the wall you're seeing that I constructed these pieces of support to hang my yard equipment, right? It's very simple, a 2x4 running horizontally and then two 2x4s running in front. You would see the same thing here as well for my yard tools. Very simple, cheap and effective way to store your yard tools.
So hopefully you liked this video and found it useful. I would really appreciate if you can hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for stopping by and watching.